Okay, I'm going to start admitting people now.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you so much for availing yourselves and joining our FEM Safetember annual webinar. This year, we've themed it Falls from Heights in the Construction Industry. The session will be running from 9 o'clock up until 11 or just after 11:05. I will take you briefly through today's agenda, and then I'll hand over to our first speaker. So our CEO, Ndibuo Manyonga, will open and welcome all our attendees. Anderson Celia will be talking about planning not to fall before the fall, how and what is important. Anli Mostet will talk about ladders, so competencies, equipment, and legal requirements. Ronan Grams will talk about a new approach on accident prevention and investigation. Nduduzi will be addressing COVID-19 claim submissions and processes. And then I will come back and do the closing. Just a few things to please note. So the session is being recorded. The recording will be made available from the FEM website. We have also been granted the permission by our speakers to avail the presentations. So the presentations will also be accessible from the website. And then just to reiterate again, we will be taking questions. We will take these after each speaker presents. So if you can please just leave your questions in the chat box, and I'll make sure that I go through as many as possible when we get to the Q&A session after each speaker presents. Once again, thank you so much for joining in, and I will now hand over to Ndibuo. Thanks, Ndibuo.
Thank you very much, Noma, and I'm just sharing my screen on my side. Okay, it is my absolute pleasure to welcome everybody to our Safetember campaign. I know a lot of you are friends of FEM, so you are quite familiar with whom we are. But for the purpose of those who might not be familiar with FEM, I thought it's worthwhile just to touch on our business and what it is that we do. So as FEM, we provide workmen's compensation cover to the construction industry in terms of the COID Act. We were established in 1936, so we are actually celebrating our 85th year of existence this year. We operate under license from the Department of Employment and Labor and the Government Compensation Fund, and indeed we work very closely with them. Our assessment rates are based on what they gazette, and indeed the benefits that we pay are also based on what they gazette. We cover approximately 6,000 construction companies, and they employ in turn 300,000 construction employees. And based on our assessment, we think we cover about half the construction industry. But effectively, if you are in the construction space, you either have an option of getting your cover through FEM or through the compensation fund. What is core to who we are and what we do as an organization is that we care about the quality of life for injured workers and their dependents. And indeed, we champion health and safety for the benefit of the construction industry and the society at large. And the Safetember campaign is a key aspect of our efforts in the space of driving health and safety within the construction industry. The campaign was launched in 2015, and it's received such great support from the industry at large. And every year we use the month of September to focus on health and safety within the construction industry. And our focus areas are determined based on the trends that we see with respect to accidents in the construction space when we reflect on our policyholder base. So I thought it's worth just sharing this specific slide, which looks at the accident stats for 2020, which is the last full year, for which we've got accident statistics available. Interesting thing to note, which you would all be aware of, is that 2020 was an unusual year generally, but also specifically for the construction industry, in that for the majority of the year, the industry was operating at reduced capacity. And indeed, for a couple of months, some of the industry participants could not operate at all. Having said that, it was still quite sad to note that we had in excess of 5,900 accidents that were reported within the industry. Please do note that is about 25% less than the accidents that we typically see. And sadly, 46 of those resulted in fatalities. Interesting to note, which we've highlighted in orange here, is that a third of our accidents are as a result of employees being struck by, and that effectively accounts for all the accidents where there's a forcible contact between an employee and an object or machinery. And this trend is quite common, that about a third of our accidents are typically as a result of struck by. About 12.8% of the accidents that we saw last year were as a result of falls, whether that was fall onto different levels or falls onto the same level. And that is the reason why we are highlighting falls for this specific Safetember campaign. This slide here would have been included as part of the invitation that you received, but it was just highlighting what the trend has been over the last 10.5 years in terms of what we see with respect to struck by being our leading cause of accidents, but more importantly for today's webinar, falls from different levels or falls onto the same level. And what we've also included is just an indication of what those statistics are over a 10-year time frame. Sadly, some of those falls do result in disabilities, right? And we do see disabilities coming through on an annual basis. Over the last 10.5 years, we've seen more than 1,600 disabilities resulting from falls, with the majority obviously resulting from falls onto different levels. And that accounts for about 12.3% of the falls that occur actually result in disabilities. In the extreme, sadly, what we also see is fatalities as a result of falls. As is to be expected, most of the fatalities arise out of falls onto different levels, with falls onto the same level accounting for a lower percentage of those fatalities. Okay, I think the key thing from our perspective that I just want to highlight is that from an FEM perspective, we review a whole number of employer reports on an annual basis that account for how falls happened and how accidents happened at large. And it is the reality that the majority of these incidents could have been prevented with the appropriate planning and foresight. And that also means that there is a real opportunity for us to actually achieve zero harm within the construction industry if we all work together. And we do believe that it is an imperative that we can get to that stage in order to protect both the lives and the livelihoods of injured employees. And this is something that definitely we should not rest until we are able to achieve as an industry at large. I would particularly like to thank our speakers today who have partnered with us in this Safetember campaign, Ancilia's, Anderson and Bronwyn, and indeed our own Dudusim Tetwa from FEM, who will just be reflecting to COVID-19, because that is something that we felt we needed to just highlight once again. I'd like to thank all of them for extending their time to come and impart, important information and key issues that the construction industry can take into account in terms of dealing with falls in particular. I'd also like to thank my colleagues, Sanjay, Norma, and Achais, who've been instrumental in ensuring that we could actually put this webinar together. And it's great to see such a great turnout from all of you who have joined us today. I'd like to welcome you again and just invite you to sit back and enjoy the proceedings for the morning. And please do make it interactive and pose your questions in the chat as outlined by Norma earlier on. That's it from my side. Thank you very much to all of you.
Thank you so much, Ndibuo, for that warm welcome. All right, so going straight into today's agenda. So our first speaker is Anderson Celia. So Anderson has been in the working at heights industry for 15 years, involved in various general and training manager roles. More recently, he has been with 3M or as the 3M market segment leader for fall from protection in the SADC region. Currently, he's the training manager at Protector Safety Gear 3M and a certified instructor through Fall Protection Group, Canada. Anderson, thank you so much for availing yourself and welcome to today's session. I will hand over to you. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Nomawetu and then Dibuo for the introduction. And then also just a general note, FEM, thank you for the invite. It's always nice to support you guys for the brilliant work you guys do for the construction industry. I just want to share my screen, and while I do that, I'll put on my camera. I'm going to switch it off once I start with my presentation. I've got a bit of a technical problem with my sound, and I don't want you to see me sitting with myself in front of my face the whole time. So I'm just going to switch off my camera, and then I'll start with the presentation itself. Right. It doesn't look like I can switch that off. So, right. No problem in any case. Right. Good morning to everybody that's attending, and thank you very much for this opportunity. As highlighted in the introduction, as for the invite, the topic that I've looked at was planning not to fall before the fall. Obviously, what is important, and I think in the introduction, one of the points that was raised was the planning part of it, and I think that's a very important point to highlight as well, because from my experience, planning is extremely important. Not really reactive planning, proactive planning. While the project is in a designing phase, or when you're still busy with a planning for the project, make sure that you plan properly, specifically focusing on working at us because it's such a high-risk environment. So the topic I'm going to discuss today is just a few general points that I'm going to run through, just a few reasons from my personal opinion why there is still some falls from height, some considerations that we can have a look at, what makes part of the planning to actually make sure that it's actually in place and done correctly with no, gray areas or gaps that can actually cause problems. Then obviously ways to approach, and these are not new to the industry. These are current topics that's always part of any training, any working rights environment, and that's fall prevention and fall protection. I've added a few slides just to maybe make it a bit more practical, being on site, seeing a few aspects, and I'm going to try and relate that to that. That can maybe assist as part of the planning process when you do your future projects. And then just a few considerations within each of those categories or approaches, just to maybe get the full process running in terms of how you can possibly look at some things to put in place to prevent falls from height. The next slide, I just want to, maybe as a way of going into the slide, it says that any man can make a mistake, but only an idiot is certain it's idiot. Now, if you know that working rights is a high-risk environment, obviously, you can't keep on doing what you're doing. You need to change. You need to be adaptable. You need to be versatile. You need to look at a site-specific type of approach. Because each site, yes, activities can be similar, but your approach needs to be different. And that's where it's very important that your planning phase is done properly, so that when you approach, or when you start on a site, that you approach it correctly, keeping the site-specific issues at hand and addressing those specifically. Not in a generic planning type of process where you find these days the guys write fall protection plans that's really generic, just cover the tick boxes, but making sure that you're actually looking after what is actually the risk areas and how you can address those. So if you look at the reasons, like I said, these are just a few that I've looked at, just put onto the slides, just to maybe as an introduction for the rest of the presentation. But the cost versus benefits is always a big problem. Some of the systems that you find these days for working rights, for prevention, for protection, it's costly. The benefits obviously is rewarding because obviously it provides you with a safe solution, but on the other hand, it's also very costly. And obviously, we also need to have a look at the cost-effective way to actually approach some of these areas, practical ways to make sure that the guys are still working safe, not spending a lot of money on the systems or the equipment that you want to put in place. But, that is one of the reasons that I've mentioned. And, the cost versus benefits, I'm not sure it's always been done properly. It's always a quick fix that's being put in place. It's not really practical. It looks fine, it looks safe, but at the end of the day, it can still cause accidents. And that's something that I feel, must be addressed. time. And, with some of the equipment and systems that we put in place for working rights, there's the installation part of it, there's the certification part of it. It takes time to install some of these things. It takes some planning. It takes, the certification itself. If I can maybe just make an example of, things like chemical anchors, you need to install, full test it, make sure that it's certified, put ID tags in place. And those are typically things that I feel that sometimes is not being done properly. Quickly throw something around makeshift beam and make sure that it's, at least something is in place. And that's not always the best solution to sometimes having, to put in place on a site. Operational, again, it's my link to the time part of it. Operational, there's always a push for productivity, making sure we can finish everything faster, quicker, make sure we can come out the project faster, and that actually provides a lot of gaps. A lot of issues where, again, it's not proactive planning, it's reactive planning, and that's, it's not the proper systems that's been put in place. And then planning, I think, as part of the topic that I'm discussing, is we mentioned already as part of the introduction from FEM side, but, corporation plans, pre-work surveys, it's extremely important. Obviously, at the end of the day, corporation plans is a legal requirement, but, is it done properly? Is it done site-specific? Is it done, has there been a typical survey being done before you go onto that? It's always difficult when there's a new project running. You're not having a fixed building in front of you. You have to approach it from drawings. But I mean, it's important to sit down with the guys doing the estimation. Your QSs will normally work with the procurement of the products on site, and also talk to the site guys, the safety guys, and speak to them and find out from them, what are the typical challenges you will find as part of this project, and address it in that way as well. Not only in an administrative way through your plans, but also in a practical way where you implement those plans and make sure the guys are actually working safe. And then adaptability or lack thereof. We've been doing it this way for 20 years. Why change? It's been effective. We haven't had any incidents. And obviously, it can lead to problems. But that's also one of the reasons. And then, a big point, I've put it in bold as well, is visible versus practical. It looks like there's something in place, it looks safe, but is it really practically safe? During an incident, will that function as it should? And that can actually cause some accidents working rights as well. Right, so let's jump into the presentation itself, and this is where we talk about the standards and the legal requirements. So this is typically a slide that I love to do during training sessions when I train corporation planners as well. And that is to make sure they understand that at the end of the day, if you look at the different levels, most of the times we've got guys that only want to go for legal compliance. The OSH Act 85 of 93 and the applicable regulations, they talk about fall prevention, fall arrest equipment. But, I always ask the question, that is legal compliance sufficient when you look at working rights? Many guys look at the definition of fall arrest and fall prevention equipment, and it says a full body harness, lanyard, and a lifeline. It doesn't specify any standards. It doesn't specify what type, vertical, horizontal, permanent, temporary, what type of harness, 1 point, 2 point, 4 point. These are just more little practical examples, but if you go for legal compliance, you will find the guys go for a more cost-effective solution, and at the end of the day, it won't be applicable to the task at hand. And that can lead gaps. So the idea is to, yes, we need to comply legally, but also go to a second level. Look at the national and international standards. Your SANS and your EN, which is applicable to working rights equipment. Obviously, you've got different standards globally as well, but those are the two standards typically used in South Africa. But if you look at those things, a harness is not just a harness. If you want a specific type of harness, a 1 point to 2 point, yes, your EN 361 will be sufficient. But looking at work positioning harnesses, suspension harnesses, more advanced systems, those need to be looked at, need to be incorporated, and need to be you need to be guided by that to make sure that when you buy a harness as legally compliant or required, that it's actually the right type of equipment for the task at hand. They talk about unit standards in the second level as well. Obviously, training, a big focus these days, and obviously as a training company, we try and emphasize to the fact that competency is extremely important. It's not just to get a certificate, it's also to make sure that the guy's actually practically prepared for what is at hand and what he will be exposed to at height, to make sure that he knows how to use that equipment effectively and safely when actually exposed to that risk of falling. Then the third level, if you look at the industry standards, so this is where my colleague, Anli, that's doing the next section, coming from the IWH, they've done brilliant work in terms of putting guidelines in place for working rights, having industry standards in place. And I always try and emphasize that you know, the legal compliance and the standards is very important, but how do you use those equipment now? How do you approach the situation when there's scaffolding, when there's ladders, when there's rope access, working rights? And the industry standards is extremely important to make sure that you reference them, keep them in mind, and obviously incorporate them as part of your planning as well. And not just focus on the basics. And lastly, yes, obviously your company standards are important, but at the end of the day, the idea that I just want to bring across is that you need to incorporate all 4 of these levels to make sure that when you do your planning, you've got not just a legally compliant plan or a legally compliant street file or a approach towards your contract, but you've got a best practice approach. And that's where you typically have very small gaps or no gaps at all. And you can feel comfortable that when you send your guys on the site, they should have the necessary knowledge, training, skills, and the systems that you use is in place to actually make sure the guys are working safe. Now, as I mentioned, fall prevention and fall protection is 2 of the main categories or approaches. This is just a bit of an introduction slide that I wanted to show you. And obviously, for any planning, you know, you train the guys doing working rights to be safe in working rights. You show them the harnesses, the lanyards, the techniques of climbing, hooking up, attaching. But at the end of the day, when you do your planning phase, don't forget the fall prevention categories or the approach. I mean, these are your first. As a planner, a fall protection planner, you have to keep these in mind. These are always your first option. Prevent rather than allow the person to fall. It talks about installation of barriers to prevent the person from falling from height. But you will see it includes things like your barricading, signage, edge protection. It can be temporary, permanent. You've got your mutes in place as well, cherry pickers, access systems. Yes, you are still exposed to falling in there. You still have to wear harnesses, but it's a safer way to access certain areas than by a ladder or by scaffolding that you need to access. Now, scaffolding is safe, yes, but mute just provides you with that additional option of a quick access that is safe and that you can use for going up to certain high-risk environments. And then obviously you'll see on the right-hand side, there's different levels, different types of systems you can use as well. That is safe, that is designed for fall prevention, doesn't require the use of harnesses and lanyards. And again, you know, it doesn't expose the guys to any type of fall systems. And these are typically what you need to, as a first level, to keep in mind to make sure that you rather prevent the person from falling than actually allow them to be exposed to a risk of falling.
Anderson.
If you look at fall protection, yes.
Anderson, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry for interrupting. Can I please ask that you switch off your camera and try and speak closer to your cell phone rather, just to try and address those technical issues that we're experiencing with the sound. Thank you.
Right, is that better for you?
Yes, just
is
try and bring it closer to your face and then continue the presentation. Thanks, Anderson.
That sounds better. Thanks, Anderson.
Right.
We've also had a request if you just slow down a little bit. The guys are battling to follow.
Okay, great. Thank you for that. Right, so fall protection at the end of the day, that is where you use controls designed to protect personnel from falling or in the event of a fall, stop them from causing severe injuries. And this is where you look at your typical working rights, equipment systems, full body harnesses, full arrest lanyards, lifelines, and lifelines obviously, you know, temporary, permanent safety net systems. Again, during the planning phase, these are typically your last option if you really want to expose the guys to a working rights environment. But, you know, in certain industries or certain instances on a construction site, you can't do anything else than provide these guys with these systems. And it does also provide that you need to do some planning into have these put into place effectively, making sure they've got the right type of equipment when exposed to working rights. Now, if you look at the hierarchy of controls, I don't think these are new to anybody. These are typically the way that you, put controls in place and you start managing that risk, specifically for working rights. But I mean, it's very important just to highlight at the end that, you know, elimination is always the best option. Try and prevent the guys from working rights. It's not always possible because with these days you get buildings that is constructed with very large overhangs. It looks very beautiful after it's been finalized, but constructing it is a big headache, a major challenge, and a huge fall risk when actually during the construction phase. So, but you have to look at that substitution. your MUP systems, your remote train operations, your engineering controls. Obviously, this is where your scaffolding and your platforms come into play. And then, of course, part of the planning as well. And, you know, planning is not a separate component in its own. It's always part of any type of risk mitigation. And that is to make sure that you've got your policies and procedures, your plan tasks, observations, your safe working procedures, your permit systems in place. And that is to ensure that, you know, the planning part is in place, but it's always the implementation part that you also have to look at. And that is very important when you do your methodologies, when you do your risk assessments, to actually put those controls and those mitigations in place. And then at the end, obviously, your PPE, and this is where you expose the guys to physically working lines, and possibly during a rescue situation. You know, when a guy's fallen, how do you how do you get the person to the level below him, to actually taking off the harness, or physically taking him off the harness while he's being suspended, to prevent things like suspension trauma and causing him to be killed. Obviously, that is the last option to allow a guy to fall, so that is putting, you know, more than one person's life at risk. But it is a culmination of a lot of planning and a lot of integration that you need to do to make sure that you have an effective, safe, and practical system in place. Now, if you look at this visual, you will see that, you know, from left to right, you've got your hazard elimination. These are, and at the backside, you will see there is certain photographs or certain depictions, illustrations, just showing you some of the ways that the people work. You know, obviously, you've got your passive and your full restraint systems, and most of the time, we want to focus on these three levels. You know, eliminate, provide hand railing, passive, full protection, guardrail, screens, barricades, something like that, preventing the guy from falling. Full restraint systems, if you really have to put a guy at height in a situation, you know, in layman's terms, you can say, you know, put the guy close to the edge, but never over the edge. And that entails a lot of planning as well. But these are typically the levels that you want to focus on. Then, of course, you've got your administrative systems, and that is, like I said, integration. You're not going to get away from that. It's part of the process. It's part of the ways that you need to look at approaching working rights, full protection plans, that you need to do the risk assessments. And then you'll see I've left level 4 out. Now, level 4 obviously is where you start going into the full arrest systems, and this is where the technical part comes into play, the competency side of it, the rescue component part of it. And, you know, typically you want to steer away from that, because that actually exposes a lot of guys to falling, to being rescued, to being exposed to a fall risk. But you will find that on a site, and there is ways that you can work around that. And that's typically where the slides that will follow. I just want to show you a few examples of what you can keep in mind when actually exposing guys to it. Now, if you look at fall prevention, you will see that there's some nice examples in the pictures that you will see on the slide. They talk about fixed platforms. Yes, ladders is mentioned there as well. You know, many guys don't like the use of ladders, but ladders is a very effective, easy, safe way to actually access, you know, certain heights. Obviously, you know, guys tend to think that a ladder is just something that you put down and you climb up, but I think Andy will highlight some of the points as well, that there is some tick boxes you need to check even when using a ladder. But it is a way that you integrate, making sure the guys can work safely at height. Your MUPs, your man basket, scaffolding, and then obviously you will see on the left-hand side, bottom part of it, which full restraint. Now, typically in full restraint, as you will see from that person working with a full body harness, he still has a shock absorbing lanyard attached to a permanent lifeline system. That's the integration part that we were looking at. So it's not purely giving a guy an anchor point and telling him, right, there you go and work. You also need to look at the training part. You need to look at the harnesses, the lanyard, the distance from the edge. You know, how does he get up to the height where he actually has to work in restraint? Is there vertical access that he needs to climb up with? So there's a lot. You know, it seems like a straightforward situation where you can provide a guy with a harness and lanyard, but there is some planning that you need to do beforehand to make sure that when you approach these areas, that you do properly and in detail to actually provide the guy with the best solution possible. Now, what I've done is, and this is something that we've been dealing with a great deal with some of the construction sites that we've been working with. And I wanted to just give you an example. Now, this is a typical illustration of a building. You will see there's different levels, there's open edges, there's some access ladders, you know, scaffolding type, or you will see on the right-hand side vertical ladders with hand railings. But these are, it might look like a typical construction site with an overhead crane also as well. But, how do you manage these type of environments to make sure the guys are working safe? Now, if you look at the heading of the slide, it says edge protection, and this is typically where we want to look at the prevention side away from the protection side. So you will see there's certain nettings, net systems, barricades put in place. There's some drop nets, for falling objects. And we talked about this morning when they went through the statistics on struck by statistics. On the construction site, there's a lot of guys using drills, grinders, welders, big equipment. And if those things fall from a height and hit the guy against the head, the safety helmet is not preventing anything from happening. You can still kill a person like that. But this is typically the way that you want to look at that. So what I've done is I've just basically highlighted some of the solutions, and I've given you a practical example in terms of what it looks like. So you will see there you've got maybe a sky roof being erected on top of the building. The guys need to access those areas. Obviously, it's an open edge, so the guys will need to work close to the edge, either doing installation of certain systems, the beam structures, or working on the side of the concrete slab as the level below indicates. But you need to manage that and have a look at that. So if I can maybe just show you this, typically what something like that would look like. Now, what I've showed you in the previous slide, the barricading systems, those are typically your more engineering systems, and you will see that those barricading are actually certified to an EN 13374 standard. And you can put it up, as you can see in the photographs, you can put it on the edge where the beams are actually going into the building. You can put it on those edges. You can put it on the sides where there's a dropping hazard, on the pitch of the sky roof, if I can use that word. Then obviously you will see, below there's also areas where the guys work on these type of structures. You can put netting below that, because the level that I'm looking at now is about a 45-meter height above. So, anything falling off there, hitting a person at the bottom, is typically something that you need to look at. So, now, when I talked about the planning part this morning, this is now, those types of barricading and edge protection, it's a costly type of exercise to go through that. It takes some planning beforehand, before the project starts. And, in this situation, practically, the idea behind it was to have some of these systems in place. But practically, the guys took a normal piece of 11mm static cement rope and put it in the middle of those, the pitch, in line with the pitch in the middle of the roof. So the guys think they have to typically unsafe access the beams, get to the middle before they can tie off, and then actually start performing their work. And that is a very difficult situation to manage. Person can fall off, you can, fall off the edges, you can fall through the beams, doing something incorrectly. And it also requires a person that's relatively trained, he's got a very good competency for working on it and understanding these type of situations to safely use the systems. There's just another example. You will see there's concrete being thrown there. In that case, you will see very effectively they've used scaffolding as edge protection. Now, scaffolding per se is used for access, not per se for fall protection, but at least there's something in place preventing the person from approaching the edge. It might provide them with a type of anchor point you can have to tie off using the scaffolding structure as well, but it's not the best solutions, but at the end of the day, it does provide a system. And the idea is that, again, instead of having scaffolding and spending that money on scaffolding just as purely as edge protection, plan around for barricading to be put on those edges to make sure that it's an effective control and still allowing the guys to actually work safely. If I can focus on the next area, you will see type of open edges on concrete slabs. Always a difficult situation because the guys need to get close to the edge. When they put glass panels onto those edges, it might be a situation where they need to stand very close to the edge. There's no physical edge protection in place. The edge protection typically, like you will see in those examples as well, sometimes fits onto the slab. It takes up space onto the slab as well, so they can't always effectively work on those edges or finalize the work to be done on those edges and that can cause problems. So you will see on the different four squares that I've indicated, there is different ways of attaching these barricading to the different slabs, allowing the person to actually get close to the edge but still being safe. Again, these, so I just want to go back. These systems are all, again, certified to your EN 13374 standard. And, you know, I've seen a lot of sites where guys are using wooden planks attached to vertical scaffold beams, just tying it off with a piece of rope around the structure, and they use that as fall prevention systems on a slide of a slab like that. And that is not effective because at the end of the day, if you look at the standard, again, 13374 standard, it talks about a class A, B, and C. And obviously that also allows that what happens when a person falls against this hand railing? Will that hand railing or that barricading actually sustain that load without breaking and prevent the person from falling? Because, you know, on certain areas, you've got an angle at which the slab runs to where it ends at the bottom where the open edge is. And if the person slips there or something happens, he slips and he falls against that barricading, the barricading must be actually strong enough to sustain that weight. And that is also, I feel, something that you know, needs to be addressed because it's not just putting a visible, like I indicated in my introduction, it's not a visible thing you need to have in place. It must be a practical thing. It must be safe to actually effectively prevent a person from falling off those type of environments. So just an example, typically there you will see open edge beams, scaffolding, again in this case being used as edge protection. You know, you might see it as an effective way because the guys need to climb through. But, you know, at the end of the day, it is a problem. These things need to be addressed in advance because you've got an open edge, you've got a drop there, and if the person falls off there, you will be exposed to a possible disabling injury or a fatality at the end of the day. Just another example. Different type of open edge. You will see there's some sheeting that's exposed there that the slab actually would be covered by concrete. Again, scaffolding put in place. But if you look at the scaffolding itself, the gaps between the scaffolding is huge. And obviously, you know, like I said, if the slip trips and falls, the guy will trip while climbing through, and you can actually fall through that gap without having being attached, because obviously it assumes that the hand railing is used for preventative solution. It doesn't have to hook up. And that can actually cause problems for him. Falling through and then obviously hitting the level below. The next one is obviously falling off the slab. And in this case, you will see there's a combination. You will see on the top square, there's netting systems that you can install that is designed for catching people as well as personnel falling off the side of the building should something like that happen. But if you look at the bottom square or the rectangle in this case, you will see that the idea is that you've got a double system in place. So you've got the barricading on the side of the slab that will effectively prevent the person from falling. But what if something should fall? Always that worst case scenario. You still have the netting on the outside of the building that is designed to catch other equipment, tools, you know, overhead suspended access platforms where a scaffolding section falls off. It can still catch this. So I think at the end of the day as well, you know, from a cost-saving exercise, and you know, from the construction industry, they can most probably give you some value to that. But there's a lot of money being lost as part of a project because of dropping objects, hitting vehicles, hitting people, possibly hitting people. That is around that building. And because these days we've got buildings in city centers being built where there's pedestrians, there's cars. There's still people moving around those areas. I mean, these are not just for the safety of personnel working on us, but also for the guys around those buildings, construction sites, to make sure that they are also kept safe. So just an example of that, obviously you will see on the left-hand side picture, there is, you know, they call the left-hand side, that they call a safety deck. So instead of having netting at the top level, where the guys are working, they put like scaffolding platforms in place to prevent anything falling while the people are walking underneath that. So, yes, a very effective way, a practical way of doing that. But again, is that the most cost-effective way to do that? I mean, is that actually preventing anybody from hitting from where the objects fell from the top level in between where the safety deck starts? Isn't there any people still exposed to those type of levels? So you have to have a look at that. And then obviously on the right-hand side picture, just indicating some of the areas where the guys are working with scaffolding. Obviously the scaffolding is in place, but you know, anything can be dropped from those different heights and they need to be safe, and there need to be certain mitigations in place. The last one is just that environment, obviously, again, focusing on the edge protection. And then you've got these drop nets that the guys install typically underneath certain open areas where they typically want, some of these are designed to actually catch people as well, but mostly for equipment falling to a different level or to the bottom level, injuring people at the bottom. And, this is typically the environment that you are faced with. So, if you look at this photograph and you look at the previous examples that I've used as well, you can have an integrated approach where you've got edge protection on the side of the slab, you've got netting systems installed underneath these beams to actually prevent any, equipment or tools falling to the lower level. Obviously in worst case scenarios, you can have other integrated systems as well, harnesses, lanyards. If the guys need to walk on the beams, there is a netting system underneath, but you get different solutions like sliding beam anchors these days that can hook up onto the beams, foot level tie-off, but integrate that with the SRL, and you've got, integrated approach towards working in environments like this, where there is a real risk of people falling and equipment falling to the bottom level. Right, so that was just discussing a little bit of the fall prevention side, just a few thoughts I wanted to run past you. Then if you look at fall protection, at the end of the day, fall protection is like the photograph indicates, where the guys are, working at heights, harnesses, lanyards, systems in place. And if I can just highlight a few points, from a FEM point of view, they always approach the situations with the ABCD. So obviously always have a look at where is your anchor points. So if the guys have to work at heights, do they have anchor points available? Is it structural? Is it certified anchor points? On a construction site, you always have a concrete wall or a concrete slab or a concrete parapet. I can't use any type of slings around it because of the size of the beams. What can I do to actually work around that? Now, how can I plan in advance to make sure I've got the right equipment for that? So does it entail the use of certified anchor points? You will see in this picture, for instance, the blue anchorage example on the beam that's vertical is called a fixed beam anchor. So it's a temporary mobile anchor certified to your N705, but it still incorporates the ability to be temporary, which means that you can reuse it after the application. And it makes it, it's a costly piece of equipment, but it makes it cost effective for the fact that it is mobile and it can be used on different environments. Your body support, obviously, very important. These days, it's not just a full body harness. You need to look at the application. Is there any vertical systems that need to use, like lifelines, temporary rope lifelines? Is there restraint systems that you can use? Because obviously, it's not just, in construction, I think the general approach is normally that it's a very cheap harness that's being used because of the amount of guys that's on site. But, you can still have a look at the harnesses and make sure that they are cost effective, but applicable to the task at hand. And that's where some planning will be very important as well. Having a second viewing in front of the harness on your chest area where there's vertical access, restraint systems, even rescue situations on site where the guys need to perform rescue situations where they will require that as part of the equipment. And that's why I think very important to emphasize once again that planning is essential, that you need to make that part of your approach towards any project. And then, of course, your connection device, your lanyard, your SRL, different options available depending on the application or the work that you're going to perform. And then the last is their rescue and retrieval. And obviously, you never want to put a person in a situation where he might fall. And obviously, with the fall prevention slides that I've shown with the barricading and the edge protection, you are typically not doing that. But, certain areas does require the use of harnesses and lanyards, and you have to make this part of your planning. If not, you will not do rescue, you'll do recovery. Because if a person is not rescued within a certain amount of time, he can be exposed to suspension trauma and he can actually physically die in that harness. Now, some considerations that I just wanted to highlight now. The list is big, it's long. There's a lot of things you can keep in mind, but I just wanted to maybe throw a few points around just to get the thoughts running, because at the end of the day, it might seem like straightforward points, but it's very important to keep this in mind when going onto a site and planning for working it out. So the first is obviously the activities to be performed. Are the guys going to walk on beams? Will they be exposed to edge protection? Will there be areas where they'll need to use restraint systems? Is there sheeting, roof access that they need to work on some of the rooftops? What are they physically going to do? What is the actual work being performed? And at the end of the day, yes, a roof is a roof, but you've got different types of roofs. You've got different types of roof profiles. You've got different types of roofs with certain angles, certain pitches. You need to approach them differently, and that's where the planning phase is important as well. Apologies. Availability of fall protection equipment, and it's always nice to have a look at what you currently have versus what you require. Is it sufficient for this project to merely have a harness and lanyard? Do I need to have, what do I need to add to that? Do I need to have slings? Is there certain I-beam structures available that I need to hook up? Obviously that is part of looking in the planning phase that you need to do before going on to site. Because you don't want to be reactive with these type of projects. You want to be proactive. Access, is there scaffolding? Is there ladders? Is there mutes? How will the guys access these type of structures? Is there, like for instance, scaffolding? If the scaffolding has got stairwells, obviously that's a safer option because then you don't have to hook up while accessing the scaffolding. But if there's vertical access via vertical ladder going up to the beam, you need to think about, the guys exposed to a forward. How will I manage that? Where is he going to with the scaffolding? Is he going to climb off the scaffolding onto a different structure, or is a scaffolding access onto a roof? How will I have to look at that? And that's also then having the access consideration, but also linking up with the availability of protection equipment. You need to align those and make sure that you are well prepared when the guys are working there. There's considerations like work platforms, what is above and below me, because obviously during a full arrest situation, the guy will have a free fall distance. He might hit something on his way down. So the best solution will be to, first of all, prevent him from falling, but if he falls, limit that distance of the fall so that you don't expose him to being hit by another scaffolding structure, another ID below him, or even being suspended for an excessive period of time to allow him to actually go into suspension trauma. Then, of course, anchor points, temporary anchor points like your concrete steel wedge anchors, sliding and fixed beam anchors. Is it applicable? Can I use these? What is available on site? What's the type of structures that you need to access? Apologies. Then permanent anchors, your anchor points, the installation, the full testing, certification, recertification. There's so many things happening out there that you've got guys installing systems that looks fine, but they're not certified. The person installing is not certified to actually do the installation. And if you look at any high-risk environment we're working right, the guy is exposed to a fall. Anchor point is one of the key aspects that you need to address. Is the anchor point above your head? Is it at your feet? Is there more than one anchor point available in a certain area? Because you have to think about rescue situations where the guy needs to perform rescues from that specific environment. So, as I've indicated, these are just a few points that I've put onto the slide, but the list is really big when you have a look at this. And this is typically guided by a site survey. You'll go on the site, you'll have to look at these points, have to address all of the aspects, worst-case scenarios, and you need to make that part of your planning when you put the project in place, or when you actually allow your guys to go onto site and work on the project. So, again, straightforward. There's I think it's a generic thing that harnesses and lanyards are part of any construction person's life. So I don't want to talk too much about that, but at the end of the day, I just wanted to highlight the fact that you get different types of harnesses, different types of lanyards. Yes, you're looking at cost effective, but keep in mind that you need to address that to the people working with the equipment as well. I mean, you get a weight rating for each harnesses. You will see that these harnesses, for instance, have got a 140 kilogram weight rating. The attachment points, do they have 2-point attachments, a back and a front bearing for rescue, for what purposes? You need to have a look at that. You need to have a look at the layer of the harnesses. Is it actually effective for the guys to work with these harnesses? Is it safe? The funny thing is that, they talk about self-rescue these days as part of fall protection or for fall arrest. And self-rescue is not really actually climb up the rope that you fell on. It's basically having things like foot loops or step loops as part of your harnesses. And that is basically allowing you to stand those, take pressure off your legs, and, you can stand there for much longer until you are rescued, but you still need the rescue to be completed. And those are small little aspects that you can add onto your planning side, or that you can add onto your equipment during the project to make sure the guys are, the exposure is limited when exposed to a fall risk. Lanyards, part of your harnesses, but you will see different types. On the left-hand side, you will see that one that's actually designed for a 16 kilonewton rating on the gate of the scaffolding hooks. You will see it's a funny bluish color, the hook. And we typically, when we approach a construction site, these are not your standard harnesses and lanyards, or lanyards in this case, but those hooks are important because for a scaffolder climbing up a scaffolding or even erecting a scaffolding, he doesn't always have a beam where you can catch where the hooks are situated vertically. Because that's the strongest way that the hooks are being used, when the hooks are vertical. But they need to attach the hooks via angle, and the standard scaffolding hook is not designed for that amount of pressure. But these ones, for instance, are. They've got a 1.6 ton rating on the gate, which means that even if it's attached at an angle, it will still sustain that weight. The guy will still be safe. Small little aspects that you can make part of your planning and that you can integrate. And then obviously you will see the middle part. You will see that's a single leg SRL and a double leg SRL. And obviously, if the guy needs to hook up and he's got a limited fall clearance, there might be a beam or a structure 2.5 meters below him. You don't want to give him a standard lanyard because that can expose him to hitting that structure when he falls. Give him an SRL, and that can limit the fall clearance to about 2.8 meters, or even less, depending on where the anchor point is. If the anchor point is above his head, you can limit that by more than another 1.4 meters because the SRL functions as would a fall erected block would function, and that would limit the distance of the fall, less pressure on the person's body. But obviously, you need to look at these situations during the planning phase and make sure that you look after that and the people using that. Just to highlight the fall clearance side of it, there's just a pre-calculation that you can look at, the free fall distance, the shock deployment, the safety factor, and in any situation where there is limited fall clearance or you want to make sure the guys are not exposed to having a 6.5 meter fall clearance as part of the risk, then you can have a look at these type of situations or these type of systems, and especially when you've got foot level tires as well. Some of these systems are rated for foot level tires, and yes, the guys are still at a risk of falling, but again, you are limiting the exposure of allowing the guys to have a 6.5 meter drop instead of, instead of a 6.5 meter drop, then having a limited fall clearance. Now, just a practical example I wanted to show you, this is also from the site. You will see the red line going vertical is the height from the one level to the next. Now, it doesn't look very high, but if you look at the structures and the equipment standing at the bottom, if a person falls off there, first of all, if he falls incorrectly, you can hit his head, you can be dead, you can hit the stone, you can hit that scaffolding as it is there at the bottom, you can hit something standing there at the bottom, which is in his way as he falls. So there's a lot of things you need to keep in mind. Not very high, but a fall risk. You need to manage it. And how do you do that? In that case, you will see typically what they've done is they put a temporary webbing lifeline in place. They used some of the steel structures as anchor points on the left-hand side where I've indicated with a red circle. They used the scaffolding, horizontal scaffolding beam as part of an anchor point. But the green line is the most important one. So yes, you can have a temporary horizontal lifeline in place in this situation, but look at the height at which it was installed. It's around about their waist level height. So that means a fall factor 1, and that increases the fall clearance, which means that if they are tie off using a standard 4 lanyard, they're still going to hit the ground. So the idea I want to bring across with this is that, always make sure that put systems in place. Vertically, yes, they've got a certified system in place. The temporary lifeline has got an EN795 rating, but has it been installed correctly? Is it actually practical and safe to use in that situation? And in this scenario, unfortunately, the end answer is that no, it hasn't been installed. It hasn't been installed correctly. You will see that it's also very close to the edge. It doesn't provide a restraint type of situation where the guys just get close to the edge but not allowed to fall over the edge. And this is typically a situation that you need to have a look at and actually address and make sure that it's actually done properly. And then, of course, you've got your SRLs as well. As my second last slide, just to have a look at, obviously these systems are being used extensively. They are horizontally rated, so you can use that in a restraint system as well. Obviously, it's got full arrest requirements and shock absorbing elements in that block as well, and that will allow the person to physically work close to an edge. In case of a fall, he's got that full arrest system in place. And then, yes, these are also very effective options when you're looking at working in certain environments. The last slide I just want to show you before I end is that, this is what we've seen on site, and I've just highlighted a few of the ways that we installed this. So you will see from the left-hand side on top picture, this is where they had glass panels that they needed to install. And the idea was not to put, the idea is to put the guys close to the edge, but the system that they were going to hook up onto was put further back into the slab, which means that you've got these pillars, which we use slings to wrap around, put the lifeline at a 4-factor 0 above the person's shoulders or even above his head, give the guy a piece of rope that he can use with the restraint system, which is, in this case, a rope grab, and that will put him effectively in a way where you can move around on the slab itself. But getting close to the edge, you can then determine the safe distance from the edge and putting him into a situation where he's still performing the work, but in a situation where he's close to the edge, but not over the edge. You will see there's your anchor point. The one at the bottom left is actually what we call the concrete wedge anchor. It's a temporary certified anchor. You can install that into concrete. And obviously, after these anchor points have been used, they're not damaged after visual inspection, you can take them out and reuse them. But it does provide you with a safe option to have an anchor point in an area where you've got limited structures or limited areas available for anchor points. The lifeline itself that's actually being installed, the intentions, making sure that the guys are using it safely, and then just some of the anchor points that's been used using typical standard full arrest or full protection equipment like weaving slings. So the idea behind it was just to give you, some sort of considerations, have a look at some of the aspects that you need to address. But I think the main point I wanted to highlight is the fact that planning is extremely important. Planning is where everything starts, and it's not just typically when, like I said, reactive planning. It must be proactive planning. It's part from a management structure where even when the estimators are busy with the project itself, getting the costing in place, they need to be part of the process up to the guys actually performing the work, because they're the guys that's going to be exposed on site. So thank you very much for that. I appreciate it. Any questions from your side, I am available to answer them.
Thank you so much, Anderson, for that very informative session. We're very tight on time, but I also know that you won't be able to stick around for the whole webinar. So I will take 3 minutes, and I know that I'm still in time from our next agenda item, but let's take 3 questions, and then the questions that we don't get to, I will send through to you, and then they will be addressed with the individuals. So the first question is from Marika. So it says there's no definition for working at heights in legislation. What is the standard height that is deemed as working from height in the industry? The second question from Martin, many times there are arguments whether scaffolding is a safe work platform or whether you must wear a harness. What is your opinion? And then the third question from Avin, at what height should you use a harness when using a ladder, and when do you need anchor points to be installed during this activity? So if you can please briefly answer those questions for us. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. And those are actually very good questions. So working at height is in the legislation, the construction, the OSH Act, in the construction regulations, don't define it as working at height, they define it as a fall risk. And, prior to 2014, they actually defined a working height as anywhere, or for a full risk, as anywhere where you are working 2 meters from your feet to the ground. So there was a height linked to that. And since 2014, they've changed it, and obviously they look at it as a full risk. And a full risk is anywhere where you are exposed to falling from, off, or into. There's no height linked to that anymore. So obviously, based on the activity being performed, the potential risk, the risk the personnel performing that activity will be exposed to, you need to address, and you need to put controls in place as per that definition. if that answers that question. The second one is scaffolding. Is it a safe platform? And obviously, you know, the use of harnesses on scaffolding. You know, from a training point of view, we always explain to the guys that when you're exposed to a fall risk, you hook up and you wear a harness and lanyard, and you need to make sure that you are attached to the structure itself. Now, as I've indicated, scaffolding that's got stairwells for access is extremely safe. If it's got handrails and guardrails at the top level where you're going to physically perform, you know, it is seen as a fall preventative situation. And I've had clients that's indicated on their sites that if that is the case, then you don't have to wear a harness and lanyard. But, you know, typically on sites that I've been exposed to, there's vertical cat ladders that has to be climbed up. So when climbing up vertically, you need to make sure that you're working safe. You need to hook up. You need to make sure that you're not exposed. And if you are exposed to a fall risk, that you limit that fall clearance by, you know, where you hook up your systems. And when you get to the top level, the client even went as far as that you can hook up while climbing up vertically, but when you're on the top level, you don't have to hook up. So there's a lot of opinions in the industry in terms of what you can do. Clients are always very, you know, they're very set in terms of determining that for their sites. But at the end of the day, you know, the short and sweet answer is that anywhere where you are exposed to possibly falling, you need to make sure that you are safe. If that entails the use of a harness and lanyard on a scaffolding, then you have to use that, make sure that the guys are accessing those areas safely. The last one, if you can maybe just refresh my memory, it says at what height, oh yeah, they talked about the anchor point. Apologies. So, oh yeah, at what height you need to use fall protection equipment, and what about the anchor point? So, you know, the height, it's a very difficult question to answer, but at the end of the day, it's all dependent on the person that's planning that work. So, obviously, you know, when you're looking at a light being fixed in an office area where there's a 4-meter ceiling that they need to access, you can't give the guy a harness and lanyard. I mean, it's not practical. There's no anchor points available. You can't install anchor points or lifelines in the office area. So there, the use of ladder systems, platforms, you know, even limited height scaffolding platforms can be used. But again, it's dependent on the approach the person that's planning the work and the guy assessing the risk will have to look at. So at the end of the day, harnesses and lanyards, my opinion, is used anywhere where there is a fall risk, where there's a chance of a person falling. And, you know, many guys might feel that it's different, but, you know, if you work 2 or 3 meters from the ground, the use of a harness and lanyard is still effective. Many guys feel that, yes, you can still hit the ground, but at the end of the day, the way that you hit the ground can be influenced by the harness and lanyard that you're wearing when falling. Anchor points, they are typically installed in areas where there is no structural anchor points available. Typically in areas like on construction sites when there's, you know, concrete parapets or areas where the guys will need to access, there's no structural beams to attach onto. You can have certified anchor points in place, installed by a certified installer, or you can have a scaffolding structure like you can see on the photographs. There's a scaffolding structure being used as a barricading, but the scaffolding, if it's certified as per the SAN standard, you can use that as an anchor point as well. So the options are really available, and it's all determined by the site survey that you need to complete in terms of determining if there's anchor points or not and where you have to install them.
Thank you so much, Anderson. And we've had very good feedback and interaction in the chat box. People have received the information very well. Thank you so much again for such an informative session. And I think from my side, one of the key takeouts is the importance of planning. We will make sure that we send through the questions that we were not able to get to. Thank you a lot, everyone, for interacting and asking the questions. All right, so next in our agenda, we've got Anli Mostert. Anli is the Trade Association Manager at the Institute for Work at Heights, who assists with industry compliance with regards to working at heights through compliance audits, best practices, incident investigations, and industry guidance. Anli has been working in the industry for the past 11 years within training, operations, management, and consultancy. She's a qualified BSc Level 2 supervisor, health and safety officer, internal auditor for ISO, the different levels that are, or ISO standards that are listed there. She's completed numerous courses in fall protection, rope access, scaffolding, false work, and so forth. Anli has assisted in writing informative articles for publications such as HSME, Engineering Africa, SA Builder, and To Build. Anli, thank you so much for availing yourself for today's session, and I'm handing over to you.
Your mic on, Anli?
Apologies. First of all, just from the IWH point of view, we'd like to thank FEM for giving us this opportunity to be part of this webinar and to provide the industry with a bit more information about ladder safety. Some of the things I will say is linked to the other presentations as well, especially Anderson's presentation. I am, however, going to switch off my video during my presentation, as I think a video distracts a bit from the actual presentation and what we are trying to put out there. Please, again, if there's any questions, just add the questions in the chat box, and then we will deal with them in future time. Thank you. So, ladder safety. Key facts that I picked up from the World Health Organization issued on the 26th of April 2021 is that each year an estimated 684,000 individuals die from falls globally, of which over 80% are in low and middle income countries. Falls are the second leading cause of unintentional industry deaths worldwide. 37.3 million falls that are severe enough to require medical attention occur each year. And prevention strategies should emphasize education, training, creating safe environments, prioritizing fall-related research, and establishing effective policies to reduce risks. Are ladders safe? Ladders are an acceptable and safe method of working at heights. So let me first mention this. When we talk about ladders, ladders are one of the most unattended and unsupervised, unplanned for activities on sites. As most of the industry thinks it's fine, or contractors or people working with ladders thinks they buy a ladder from builders, whatever. They've had a ladder for years. They've been doing climbing ladders forever. It's minimal risk. It's just a quick job. It can be done within 5 to 10 minutes. Ladders are, as discussed previously and as stipulated, one of the leading accidents for falling on different heights as per FEM and as per DEL. That causes incidents and accidents on site. We need to start paying attention by providing more information and ensuring that our people are competent. So I'm going to run through a few factors regarding the competency of ladder users, the type of ladders to be used, the standards and legislation regarding ladders, as well as what we can do to prevent ladder incidents. We ask the questions, are ladders safe? Ladders are an acceptable and safe method of working at height when the work to be done is light work for short durations. The person performing the work is medically fit to work at height and has been properly trained. The ladder is in a good working condition. When we decide on which access method to use, because as we all know, there's different access methods for the type of work we are going to do, we need to use the concept of global risk. So global risk in this aspect is not an international risk. It is your site, your site risk. So we take the GR times the number of people on site, which is the number of people on site, times the times it takes the job to be done. If there's different methods, so your lowest number of GR will show which is your best access method. So if you have a lower number GR for a MEUP access or using a scaffolding, then rather use those access methods than ladders, for example. Risks and hazards occur when using ladders due to the following factors. The correct ladder is not being selected for the task being performed. A lot of times on site, you see incorrect ladders. The ladders are either too small, they're not compatible with the work to be done. The person is not trained in the use of ladders. This is a major factor in the industry because a lot of sites we go to, we see that the actual user of the ladder has been using it with experience and not with competence. Ladders are used that do not conform to the correct manufacturing standards. If you take 80% of the ladders in the industry at the current moment, they are all non-compliant to the standards and the requirements of how they need to be manufactured and to what standards they need to be tested. And ladders are not inspected prior to use, or the inspection criteria for safety is unknown. Understanding the risks of ladders, the user needs to be able to identify the different types of ladders, the appropriate use of the ladder, as well as how to adequately inspect the ladders. If we don't understand, if our ladder users don't understand the basic principles of the risks, then how do we expect them to use the ladder safely and end up going home safely? Common hazards when using ladders are slip, trips, and falls, ladders over tipping, from overreaching, electrical shocks from using unsafe ladders or ladders that are not meant for the same purposes, ladder defects due to damage, ladder failure due to overloading, improper setup and use, and equipment being dropped. In most cases, the manufacturer will supply information with the ladder on the risks associated with the type of ladder. The weight limitations of the ladder, of the type of ladder selected, must also be displayed by the manufacturer and should conform to SANS 50131 or EN 131 and its relevant parts. So I'll go into the SANS and the ENs and the regulations in a little bit later. The risk should be considered when compiling the risk assessment as part of the fall protection plan. So all activities on site always start with your site inspection and your risk assessment. As per Construction Regulation 10, it is a requirement to have a fall protection plan in place. But it also depends what your fall protection plan is going to include is based on your risk assessment that's done on site. I'm going to show you just a small video of how done by SafeWorks South Australia of how managing risks of fall is, and then we'll go into more detail and depth of this.
Portable ladders can be a sensible and practical option for low-risk, short-duration tasks. Most incidents involve a ladder being used incorrectly or inappropriately. Ladders should have a load rating of at least 120 kilograms and be manufactured for industrial use. They also need to be the right height for the job. Before setting up a ladder, conduct a visual inspection for damage or faults. Look for missing, cracked, broken, loose, worn or distorted parts, and slipping hazards. If you find any defects, do not use the ladder until repaired or replaced. When using a ladder, maintain safe clearance distances to overhead power lines. If you are working near electricity, use a ladder made of non-conductive materials. Ensure the ground is adequate, that it is level and the ladder will not sink or slide. Make sure the top part of the ladder rests against a firm, level structure and is pitched at a ratio of 4:1. When used for access, the ladder should extend at least 1 metre above the landing. Do not set up in a position where workers need to climb over or through things. Do not place against brittle surfaces. Do not use a step ladder for entry to or exit from another workspace. Do not place ladders on objects or platforms to gain extra height. Secure the ladder at the top or the bottom, or even both ends to stop slipping, or have someone hold it. Step ladders must be open fully. When climbing up or down, always face the ladder and maintain 3 points of contact. Only climb to the second step from the top of a step ladder or the third rung from the top of a ladder. Do not face away when climbing down. Do not carry up or down objects which make climbing unsafe. Use suitable hoisting equipment instead. At the work position, when you need to have both hands free for a brief period, maintain 3 points of contact. Do not rest tools or other items on the steps or hanging from the rungs. Do not lean to one side or overreach. It is much safer to get off, move it, then start again. Do not work side on. Do not straddle or face the opposite direction. Do not allow more than one person on the ladder. If the ladder is near moving objects, it must be protected. Where necessary, consider ladder safety devices. Human error is by far the leading cause of ladder incidents. Remember, controlling fall risks is the only option.
So as we can see, there's a couple of things that we need to keep in mind when working in ladders, and ladders are not as simple as just using a ladder, climbing up and down and doing your job. We're going to look at legislation and standards. The first regulation we need to look at is the General Safety Regulation, section 13A 1 to 6, which covers the basic requirements when using ladders and must be read in its entirety before being implemented. This is to avoid any misunderstanding or misapplication of the context. We can't just read half a regulation, half a section of a regulation, and implement that part which is applicable to us. We have to read the full section of the regulation and implement everything that is relevant or applicable. The standards for ladders in South Africa is SANS 50131 or the International EN 131 standard. There's also an ANZ standard, which I can provide information on, but the majority of the standards that we use are SANS or EN, and they cover part 1, 2, 3, 4, 6, and 7. Part 1 covers the terms, types, and functional sizes of ladders. Part 2, requirements, testing, and marking. Part 3, user instructions, which are very important and which very few ladders nowadays are issued with. Part 4, it covers single and multi-hinge joint ladders. Part 6, telescopic ladders. And Part 7, mobile ladder platforms. A lot of ladders are being sold mainly through chain stores, for example, to your Builder, your Chamberlains, and things like that, which are labeled EN 131 or SANS 50131. Some are manufactured locally. They will mostly then comply with SANS 50131, and a lot of the imported ladders are comply with EN 131 and then the relevant parts. But a simple check before buying a ladder is to check if there's a user guide or manual with the ladder. Because if there's not, then the ladder cannot comply because it doesn't comply to all the standards it needs to. Fall arrest and ladders. Now, this is a major discussion point within the construction industry, even when you're at a bridal function and ladders come up, it's always fall arrest and ladders. Harnesses are not, or other fall arrest devices must not be attached to a ladder. Again, this is also dependent on your risk assessment. If you're going to use an A-frame ladder or a short lean-to ladder, the ladder was not built for the harness to be attached to. Additional protection or prevention needs to be applied. Construction Regulation 10.4 stipulates a contractor must ensure that fall prevention and fall arrest equipment are securely attached to a structure or plant, and the structure or plant and the means of attachment thereto are suitable and of sufficient strength and stability for the purpose of safely operating the equipment and any person who could fall. If a ladder was not tested according to the standards for a user to be on, for the weight of the user, as well as the attachment of the lanyard, then how can we establish that the ladder has been certified safe to use with a harness? If a fall arrest system is used with a harness, have we actually looked at the rescue methods to be taken into account? A lot of fall protection plans out there cover basic risks, but if very few of them cover ladders, especially high-rise ladders, for example, 12.5 meters or 14, above 14 meters. And if very few of them cover the actual rescue methods of a person falling from that ladder. Ladders need to be both suitable for the task and in a safe condition before they can be used. As a guide, only use ladders that have no visible defects, have an up-to-date record of the detailed visual inspections carried out regularly by a competent person. These should be done in accordance with the manufacturer's instructions. Ladders that are part of a scaffold system still have to be inspected every 7 days as part of the scaffold inspection requirements. Are suitable for the intended use, example, are strong enough and robust for the job and conform to the correct manufacturing standards. So as we saw previously, there's different standards for different ladders and different requirements, and have been maintained and stored in accordance with the manufacturer's instructions. Why incidents happen, and as we can see, we see a lot of these driving on the highways, driving past construction sites, driving past office parks, is on the back of the vehicles that in picture number 1, you'll see on the left-hand side, there's very few safe ladders out there that actually still have their non-slip feet with them. On the picture on the right-hand side, how many times have you driven past a site where someone's using a ladder to clean windows? And the guy's stretching so far, you can barely imagine how his feet's holding onto the ladder. Placing ladders on unsafe structures or on additional structures or objects to extend the ladder instead of just purchasing a safer ladder that can be extended to the right length. And using ladders that haven't been inspected with bolts and nuts and steps that are unsafe. Height is not only the critical factor when using ladders, as a lot of incidents on ladders don't happen above 14 meters or 12.5 meters or 8 meters, but happen with lower A-frame ladders or small step ladders, as you will see in the next video, which is just one example.
Ladders are simple, right? but falls are the leading cause of death in construction. 1/4 are from ladders. This is the site where a 33-year-old worker died. Fatal falls happen even from heights of less than 6 feet. It was a simple task, washing windows. The worker tied a 5-gallon bucket of cleaning solution to the top of the ladder, climbed the ladder with tools, then turned facing the window, using the heels of his work boots to balance himself near the ladder's top rung. The force of the worker's action on the top-heavy ladder caused it to tip over. A foreman from a different company heard the crash and called 911.
911, what's your emergency?
When EMS arrived minutes later, the worker was unresponsive and having seizures. He was taken to a hospital where he died 14 hours later.
So as you can see, even the smallest ladder or the smallest step ladder can cause a fatal injury or accident. Ladder competence now, this is also, as I said previously, a big discussion within the industry, because how do I train my person, or what is out there for me to train my person against to be competent or confident to use a ladder. So users of ladders must be trained in the type of ladder being used, have an instruction on the type, and understand how to erect, use, and take down the ladder safely as per manufacturer's instructions. Now, just a general question is, how many of the participants currently have, in any time during the employment of an employee or use of a ladder, actually given manufacturer specifications and instructions to the persons using the ladders, or actually taking the time in training the employees and the ladder users on the manufacturer's instructions? Ladder training is currently registered with the Institute for Work at Heights as a skills program, and users are issued with a license to operate. So there are currently no unit standards registered for ladder users. So what the IWH did is we registered a learning, LNQ, which stands for Learning Not Qualification. So LNQ is registered exactly the same way as a unit standard, and they are written and registered where unit standards do not exist, or where unit standards fall short in the outcomes required for competence. But they also establish competency in the same manner as a unit standard. There's an LNQ letter written for ladder users, ladder inspectors, ladder specialists, which include extension ladders over 14 meters, and step and multi-hinged ladders up to 2.8 meters. It's always better to ensure that you have done everything as far as the current act stipulates, everything reasonably possible, to ensure the safety of our employees and as well as the safety of the ladder users. Precautions when using ladders safely. There are a lot of ladders on the markets, and the use of the ladder will depend on the type selected, as well as the competency level of the person using the ladder. If we expect our ladder user, our person that's using the ladder, to use a ladder that's an extension ladder longer than 14 meters, we can't expect him to have the same competence as him using a 2-step ladder. The following types of ladders have been identified for the scope of this presentation. We include step ladders and leaning or extension ladders. Once the pre-use inspection has been completed on the ladder, there are simple precautions that can minimize the risks of a fall. Ladders are not designed to be used as a fall arrest system unless it has been approved as such by a competent person and by tests. We'll start with leaning and extension ladders. Using some precautions we can look out for is only to carry light materials and tools when climbing the ladders, and using applicable tool lanyards or rigging methods. Don't overreach, and make sure your safety belt buckle stays within the stiles. It's a simple test. Comfortable, make sure that the ladder is long enough or high enough to reach the area that you need to access comfortably. And don't overload it. Consider the worker's weight and the equipment or materials that they carry before working at heights. A lot of times also on sites, you'll walk past someone using a ladder, but he's got a bucket, he's got his tools, he's got his harness on, and he still needs to hold onto the ladder. So is that ladder made for the weight that it's going to carry? On the left-hand side, you'll see a user maintaining 3 points of contact, and this is something we can't iterate enough. And then on the right-hand side is the incorrect ladder user with overreaching and no maintaining 3 points of contact. Placing a ladder against it, using an extension ladder, it needs to be used at an angle of 1 to 4. It needs to be placed at an angle of 75 degrees. You use the 1 and 4 rule. which is the arm length rule, which is for each 1 unit in, out for every 4 units up. Always grip the ladder and face the ladder rungs while climbing or descending. Don't slide down the stiles. Quick descent methods. Don't try to move or extend ladders while standing on the rungs or while the ladder is used. Ensure the ladder extends at least 1 meter, 3 rungs above the work area. Don't work from the top of the top 3 rungs. Don't stand ladders on movable objects such as pallets, bricks, lift trucks, tower scaffolds, excavator buckets, vanes, or mobile elevated work platforms, or on the back of a construction vehicle. Avoid holding items when climbing. Use applicable tool equipment or rigging methods. Don't work within 6 meters horizontally of any overhead power lines unless it has been locked out, tagged, or it is protected with insulation. Use a non-conductive ladder rather, example fiberglass or timber, for any electrical work. So when using ladders on new buildings or roofs, a good practice is to use a standoff device to ensure a strong resisting point. Maintain 3 points of contact when climbing. This means hands and 2 feet, or 2 feet and 1 hand at all times. Where you cannot maintain a handhold, other than for a brief period, you will need to take other measures to prevent a fall or reduce the consequences of one happening. Keep your body against the ladder as a 3rd point of contact. Now here I want to also bring in where fall arrest harnesses are used, where guys are drilling, installing anchors, installing bolts, fixing roof trusses, things like that. The industry is using a fall arrest harness and its lanyard as a 2nd point of attachment. If the ladder is again not built to withstand the weight and the limit of that and cannot withstand a fall and the forces of the fall for that ladder, please don't use the harness with the ladder. Use additional methods. For a leaning ladder, you should secure it by tying the ladder to prevent it from slipping either outwards or sideways and have a strong upper resting point. How many ladders did we see in the industry that's not actually tied down or secured? That's standing loose against window panels while window cleaning, while standing loose against the roof truss of a 1 or 2 story building while the guys are working on the roofs. Very few. Do not again attach a safety harness to a ladder. It was not manufactured for the purpose of it. Extension ladders over 14.5 meters must be secured at the base and top. We're going to move over to step ladders. When using a step ladder to carry out a task, the following precautions must be followed. Check all 4 step ladder feet are in contact with the ground and the steps are level. Only carry light materials and tools again. Don't overreach. Don't stand and work on the top 3 steps, or only work on the 2nd last step of an A-frame ladder unless there's a suitable handhold. Ensure any locking devices are engaged. Position the step ladder to face the work activity and not side on or backwards. As best possible, avoid work that imposes a side loading, such as side-on drilling through solid materials, example brick or concrete. There are occasions when a risk assessment may deem it safer to work side-on, example in a retail stockroom where you cannot engage the step ladder locks to work face-on because of space restraints in narrow aisles. But you can fully lock it to work on a side. Where side-on loadings cannot be avoided, the steps must be prevented from tipping over, example by tying the steps. If this is not possible, then a more suitable type of access equipment must be used. Maintain 3 points of contact again. This means 2 feet and 1 hand, or when both hands need to be free for a brief period, 2 feet and the part of a body supported by the step ladder. So either your knees or your chest or your waist. As per the example in the picture, you will see with our guys fixing a light bulb. He needs to use both his hands, but he cannot surpass the 3 point of attachment. So he's using both his feet on the same step and his knees as support and as the 3 points of contact. When deciding if it's safe to carry out a particular task on a step ladder, where a handhold cannot be maintained, example to put a box on a shelf, hang wallpaper, or to install a smoke detector on a ceiling, the following must be considered. The height of the task, whether a handhold is still available to steady yourself before and after the task, for example, the handhold ladder on the right-hand side, whether it is light work, whether it avoids side loading. So ladders are made for light work where it stipulates for work that's less than a certain amount of time. If we're going to stand on the ladder the whole day, then ladders are not the best access methods. Whether to avoid side loading, whether to avoid overreaching, and whether the step ladder can be tied, example, when working side on. Multi-hinge ladders are also available and can be purchased at any shop nowadays. And multi-hinge ladders can be used on several configurations. For example, step ladders, side ladders, single ladders, and single ladders with standoffs, as well as extension ladders. But under no circumstances should it be used for working at heights in a table configuration, as this is an unsafe work situation. Securing ladders. Ladders must be secured into position when being worked on. This is done by tying the ladder to a suitable point, making sure both styles are tied. Where this is not practical, the following methods can be used in sequence of importance. Secure the ladder with an effective ladder stability device. Securely wedge the ladder, example, wedge the styles against the wall as support. And foot the ladder. Footing is the last resort and where possible should be avoided by selecting an alternative means of access. So on the left-hand side, you'll see tying the ladder partway down, where both styles are tied down. In the middle, tying the ladder near the base, where you've got a center point of attachment. And while using access ladders on scaffolding and platforms, they should be tied and extend at least 1 meter above the landing point to provide a secure handhold. It should not be shorter than the access point. So I'm going to show you a couple of videos of why ladders need to be secured, inspected, and safe, and the persons need to be competent for use. As there a lot of horseplay also happens on ladders on construction sites. So as you can see in most of these videos, the ladders are either not tied, they're not used for the correct methods or access systems, they're not used in the correct way, and the person using them are only using them for a short period. But in those cases, ensuring that the ladder is safe and for the right purpose is not even part of the planning process. Inspections of ladders, which plays a major role in a lot of incidents and accidents happening with regards to ladders, is the lack thereof, if I can put it in those terms. Inspections rarely and very often do not happen on any sites or with any employees or employers. There are two kinds of inspections that we can look at. It's the pre and post use and the formal inspection. Pre and post use are done by the user before and after using the ladder and are not recorded unless the user reports a fault to his or her supervisor and or her ladder inspector. I have to say, if your company decides to keep these inspections as records as well, please do so. Evidence is always better than the lack thereof. The second inspection is a formal example. For example, their recorded inspections are done regularly by the ladder inspector and recorded. Frequency of use will dictate the frequency of inspections. Ladders that are used on a daily basis should be inspected monthly, and for less frequent use, inspections can be done every 2 to 3 months. Again, your risk assessment, which should include ladders, will establish how often inspections should be done and by whom. When carrying out inspections, the following can be identified. Any twists, bends, or dents in the stiles. On composite ladders, all components must be composite, must be carefully checked for splitting. Cracks, wears and tears, bends on the rungs, or even if any of the rungs are loose, missing or damaged tie rods, cracked or damaged welded rods, loose rivets or damaged stays, missing, loose or worn footings and non-slip devices, wear and tear on pulleys, defective locking devices, bracing is in good condition, worn or frayed ropes for extension ladders, any other specifics required as per manufacturer instructions. And there may be additional requirements for inspection timber or fiberglass ladders, which should be provided also by the manufacturer. Cleaning, maintenance, and storage. Ladders should be cleaned after use. Paint, grease, or other chemicals must be removed to ensure no future damage to the ladder, which could cause it to fail during use. Ladders must be stored in such a way that they are protected against ultraviolet rays, rain, and splashing with oils, paints, and chemicals. Ladder storage racks must be designed to protect the ladder when not in use. The spacing between two supporting points should not exceed 2 meters. Materials must be placed on ladders while in storage. And avoiding using harsh chemicals when cleaning, such as acids or strong solvents, as these could damage or weaken the ladder. Unsafe ladders, if they are identified, needs to be removed from service and replaced. Unsafe ladders need to be tagged as unsafe for use before they are disposed of. Wooden ladders that are painted must be removed from service, as paint can disguise any defects or cracks. And records of disposal must be kept to ensure correct manner of disposal. I've run through most of the requirements for ladders regarding competency, equipment, and standards. I'm going to show you guys a short video. It's more of an informative video that consolidates everything that we have spoken about. Please keep in mind that the ladders that we're using is not the standard ladders that we buy from local suppliers, but they are available in the market either for import or purchase. But just keep in mind, as we discussed through all the information and as we went through the presentation, the different methods of actually securing and ensuring the safety of the employees who's working on the ladders, as well as ensuring that the ladders are safe.
This is Ted. Hi, Ted.
Hey,
Ted, how much do you weigh?
about 220. Well, 245.
Probably more accurate if you're in your shorts. There we go. A 245-pound Ted.
Come on, I'm working on it.
It looks like a lot of that might be in your head.
I'm big boned.
You know, with Ted's boots and clothes on, it's more like 260. But now Ted must get geared up. Ted needs his hoodie. And his jacket.
What the?
Can't forget the vest. His tool belt. Oh yeah, his gloves. And don't forget his extra custom specially sized mega fitted ultra wide triple XL hard hat. And with that, Ted is finally ready to work. As you can see, Ted is over 300 pounds.
3 bills? There's no way that's right.
You betcha that's right, Ted. The ladder he normally uses is only rated for 300 pounds. You're looking at an OSHA violation and a potential ladder accident. That ladder is not designed for you to climb on. You need a 1AA rated ladder that has been designed and tested for up to 375 pounds. You might think you're light enough, but you're not taking into account all of your tools and materials, or the dynamic force applied with each step. Are you ready, Ted? Look, Ted, a work site.
Yeah, I know what this is. Thank you.
Let's elevate that big head of yours. Can't quite reach it, can you? Whoa, whoa, whoa. Don't do that, Ted.
Why not?
There is no excuse when it comes to your life. That's why we removed the top rung. Now guys like you won't even be tempted to step on it.
Cool.
Check this out. Sometimes we do crazy things to get the job done. The safe frame is available in different sizes. It's important to use the right size ladder for the job.
Not bad. All right, well, let's see what we got here.
Come on down. Just so you know, Ted, up to 20% of stepladder injuries happen when you miss the bottom step while climbing down. Stop. The ground cue is an audible and tactile indicator letting you know that you're on the bottom rung. So this way you don't step off too soon and blow the crap out of your knee or ankle, or even worse, your back. Boom. Safety. Now, Ted needs to move the ladder. But what's this? Ted's found uneven ground? Not everyone has the luxury of working on a perfectly even surface. Ted, you sure you want to do that? Ted. Do you realize that you, sir, are overreaching? Don't you remember what we've been talking about? Safety, Ted.
Oh yeah, right.
Get off the ladder and use the ratchets. They're leg levelers. Use your head. Ted, I didn't mean that literally. Use your foot.
So I'd just like to make a comment with regards to this specific ladder is where these, where the current local ladders, most of them don't have these step down control arms. There's different methods of actually ensuring that the ladder is safe and different aspects that can be used.
Each click is another 1/4 inch of leveling adjustability. You have 6 1/4 inches with each leg to make sure you stay level. Don't you think this is better, Ted?
Yeah, nice.
All right, come on down, Ted. Do you know why all of this is so important? The reason why we do this, Ted, is to bring you home.
So that's all I have with for you today with regards to ladder. As you guys seen, there's a lot of details and stuff that goes into the ladder, the safe use of ladders and the actual safety of the actual ladder. We as the industry, I think, need to pay more attention to ladder users and that is the type of ladders we use on our sites and the ladders that we allow onto our sites, as well as the control of the inspections and the ladder users. We allow too many times unsafe ladders to be used or persons that are not trained in the safe use of a ladder to be used on site and go onto site because it's a quick and easy job. But it's those quick and easy jobs, as we've seen, that creates most of the incidents and a lot of incidents working at heights and on sites. And those can be avoided by just following the correct standards, training, and inspections and methods. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Anli. We got some very good feedback once again in the chat room. People are very, they found the session very insightful. And again, a lot of nuggets that they found in your presentation. Because of time constraints, we will not be taking questions for this particular session, but Anli definitely will address some of the key questions that have come out. They will be sent through to her, and I will make sure that they are passed on to the right people. All right, so now we're moving on to our next agenda item. And this session is going to be hosted by Dr. Bronwyn Gens. Dr. Bronwyn Gens was the lead investigator on both fatal incidents at KHI-1 Solar in 2014. Her career in the construction and built environment commenced in 2009 after completing a 2-year apprenticeship. She was awarded her PhD on the 5th of Feb 2021. She completed her NEBOSH Oil and Gas International certification in 2018, amongst a lot of other academic achievements. She specializes in 4 of the 7 chambers for working at heights. She's been appointed as the lead investigator on a multitude of fatal fall from height incidents. Bronwyn, thank you so much for availing yourself, and I will hand over to you. Thank you.
All right, thanks so much, Norma, and good morning to all the attendees. And FEM, thank you so much for yet another successful webinar. You truly do make a difference in industry. All right, so today we are discussing a new approach on accident prevention and investigation. Somehow seem to be stuck with my presentation. Just give me 1 second. I'm going to continue sharing case, or Norma, can you just confirm that you can still see my screen? I'm just not going to do it in the broad perspective.
Sure, we can. Go ahead.
Sama does not seem to be moving.
Here we go. It has advanced.
All right. Okay, most people conform, they do not create. That's an icon or a saying by one of my icons in industry, Jim Rohn. And then the objective of today's presentation is to encourage safety practitioners to create and not just to conform when it comes to incident management and accident prevention. And when I use the word create, I'm not referring to drawing or coloring in. It's about actually tapping into certain or specific areas in your brain so that we can start becoming creative and streamline our protocols and approaches on incident prevention and management. Okay, so if I had 1 rand for every time I heard this, you know, in my entire career, I could probably, I'm just going to actually turn my pages here and read off this. All right. So if I had 1 rand for every time I heard someone mention that we had less incidents when safety was less strict, I probably could be retired by now. So the only reason we don't have, or it seems or appears to have been less back in the day, was because we were not capturing the data. But my question now is, now that we have the data, is the data actually assisting us in industry? You know, do we have a central database that we can capture this data on? Or alternatively, is this data being used as a stick that's affecting our LTI and DIFR stats, and in turn affecting our tender prospects? Okay, the data we collect, is it being captured in isolation? And I'll get into this a little bit, you know, into a little bit more detail later on in my presentation. And then with regards to the central database, I've obviously just taken a quote here from one of our health and safety magazines in our country. There has been little research on fatalities within the South African construction industry, despite its known risks, you know. And, you know, something simple like, and I've not yet seen this in any of my incident investigations, have we included stuff like when last or for how long an employee has slept, you know, prior to that specific day that he had worked? And have we captured items such as what meals did the employee eat? When last did the employee have a meal? And then we obviously, I'll get into lagging and leading indicators a little bit later, but do we have patterns of time occurrence? All right. And then if you access International Labour Organization, I invite anyone currently sitting on the forum or in attendance today to be my guest to actually access IOL's website and have a look. South Africa does not feature within the top 53 countries when it comes to fatal and non-fatal work-related incidents. Yes, we do have data that's captured, but it's more labor related and not specific to our actual incidents or injuries at work. Okay, so we also note that statistics available across various platforms this is obviously with an exception to FEM, but again, we cannot have one sector, inputting data. We need a broad perspective because obviously Department of Labor and the other compensation house aids in giving us accurate data from a statistics perspective. So now I have a look at any data made available, and if you are lucky, it is 2 years behind. Okay, and these amounts of data or statistics that we have, everyone would understand from a health and safety or an incident management perspective, we see these statistics as a lagging indicator. Okay, and in incident management, we address both lagging and leading indicators. These indicators also form part of ISO 45001 safety management system, and a lagging indicator is easy to measure, but it's hard to change. So it's stuff that's happened in retrospect. All right. Examples of lagging indicators is fall from heights resulting in fatalities, fall from heights resulting in disability injuries. So we've got the statistics, but it's from a lagging perspective. All right. And obviously our key in preventing accidents from happening is taking both our lagging and our leading indicators to put control measures in place from avoiding the incidents or similar incidents from happening again. Okay, so do we really understand and truly understand the root cause is another question I would like to pose to the forum. Okay, and if we do understand the root cause, what have we done with this information? Because it's all good and well understanding there was no barricading in place, but I'll get into the why a little bit further. But it is important to understand what we have done with this information. And the key to incident management is to monitor and measure leading indicators. All right. So that's the foresight. That's the foresight that we speak of. And I mean, even in law, dolus eventualis, guilty by means of dolus, is the ability to foresee instead of willful blindness. All right. And examples of this would be your leading indicators. An example of a leading indicator would be your health and safety audits, your visual felt leaderships, and then information shared across various platforms, such as the IWH, FEM, and SIOSH. All right, and then I'm just going to go into our steps or preventative measures. We've just discussed that a leading indicator would be safety audits. And I speak on behalf of a typical construction site. We'll have a client, we'll have a principal contractor, and we've got our various contractors. And I'm sure I don't just speak on my personal experience on my behalf, but on a multitude of health and safety officers or practitioners that represent contractors on various sites, irrelevant of the capacity, whether it's a contractor or principal contractor. So you get to site. Well, before you get to site, you get an email and there's a health and safety specification, and we've got a baseline risk assessment. And, sometimes they dictate the index format that they want the safety file in. And often, not most, but oftentimes you've got a limited time frame because you're running more than one site. To get the safety file compiled, you've got various employees that you need to discuss this information with, implement the file, and off you go and you sit and you attend your health and safety audits. Okay. A percentage of compliance is allocated, and this then qualifies a contractor to be compliant or not compliant, meaning, yes, you can go ahead and proceed with your work. Okay, and then my question to the auditors, and this is in my personal experience, I have not yet in my entire career seen one auditor look at my fall protection plan and see if my fall protection plan, where I make reference to the actual equipment that's going to be used, because the equipment, there's obviously a very nice guideline outlined by IWH. Well, there's a second guideline that's out now, basically giving you pointers as to what the basics are that should be in a fall protection plan. And if you have a look there, your equipment is it needs to be specified. Now we say safety harness, and it needs to conform with a specific SANS code. Not once has a safety officer had a look at my fall protection plan to see if my safety harness I've specified has a dorsal D-link. Not once. And majority of our rescues, and I'm not talking about a simulation rescue where we go on our fall protection rescue training, where we, in a perfect setup in a classroom and it's a controlled environment, we perform rescues from the front D-link, but your natural position when you're falling, your safety harness is attached to the back. I mean, your shock absorbers are attached to the back of your harness. You're attached to wherever your anchor point is, whether it be fall factor 2, 1, or 0. Your inclination for the body is to fall forward, not backwards. So majority of the safety harnesses I've seen on sites, or the accidents I've seen on sites, I wouldn't say so much so failure to perform rescues, but it's the fact that we haven't had foresight as to, once we've outlined the rescue that we're going to be doing, where we're going to attach the rescue equipment to, okay? And then how many auditors have looked at the rescue plan to see if the procedure outline can actually be performed in the work environment? All right, a typical example of this is a ratchet strap rescue. I would pay money to see someone perform a ratchet strap rescue if someone has fallen off or is suspended from a lifeline on a roof system. Okay, but the paperwork's in place, but how practical is it? All right, and then has the auditor looked at lifelines? I mean, Anderson addressed it in quite a lot of detail. There are various types of lifelines, and then I've actually just got to move my slide quickly so everyone can. Okay, so now we have a look at lifelines. Do we have the correct lifelines for the application that we are working on? And again, Anderson used really good practical experiences or practical examples of the different sites where those lifelines were installed. As an auditor, my question to you is, do you know that there are different codes of practice, that there are different SANS codes when it comes to lifelines? Do we understand the different SANS codes and tension and torsion, cross-loading when it comes to anchor points and anchor selection installation, self-identified or planned anchors? Do we look for those items in the key critical documents like a fall protection plan, an elevated work risk assessment? It's a paperwork exercise. All right. And then do we understand the contents? It's one thing to know that we've got anchors that need to comply, for example, with SANS 5795. But what is the content of that EN or SANS standard? Do we understand the content in order to audit against the content and then have a practical implementation of it? And then do we know that lifelines in general, over every 5 meters, you need to have intermediate anchors? How many employees or employers, for that matter, enforce and implement that on our construction sites? And then do we understand that if we can't have intermediate anchors, that it's okay, like Anderson used that one example, to use a shock absorbing lifeline, because then you can do away with the 5 meter intermediate anchors? And then do we understand that it's almost impossible to place intermediate? I've seen this on various accident scenes, that we've got a lifeline in place. There's no intermediate anchors, but it's on our IBR roof sheets. And we all know the industrial buildings have got excessive spans of IBR roof sheeting, and you've got a lifeline spanning anything from 18 to 22 meters with no intermediate anchors. All right. Okay, so when I perform incident investigations, there are namely 3 things that always stand out as an excuse or a reason. And I will appreciate the fact that there is viable reason behind it. I speak again from practical or personal experience. As a safety practitioner, there are so many codes, so many standards, and you can't be jack of all trades. Well, hopefully jack of all trades and not master of none, but it's almost virtually impossible to be well-versed with all the codes and still implement and still run our site. So I appreciate and understand, you know, the excuses, but I'll get into the data behind these excuses not being viable anymore. So why do we have all, you know, why do we not have these measures in place? And the first excuse or reason I get often is budget or financial constraints, time or deadlines. Again, we're in construction, and I do believe that any practitioner attending this seminar today can attest to the fact that we don't have the luxury. This is not a static environment. Today, we've got an access stairwell. 2 days later, that access stairwell gets closed because we need to move our hoarding areas, or we need to set up a rubble chute. So it's not a static environment. And then the next item, which I believe is the number 1 and contributing factor to our incidents on site, is lack of knowledge on services and products available more than anything else. Perfect examples of the shock absorbing lifeline. All right, so I'm just going to go into a little bit more detail. Budgets and financial limits. A comparative study between the United Kingdom and South Africa found that research conducted in the UK by the Health and Safety Executive determined indirect costs for fall from height accidents to be 11 times their direct costs, while research conducted in SA by Nelson Mandela University determined indirect costs to be 14.2 times the direct cost. In the UK, the accident costs are determined as the equivalent of 8.5% of the project tender price and approximately 5% of the annual organizational running costs. Comparatively, in SA, the total cost of incidents or accidents is estimated to be approximately 5% of the project value completed, the completed project construction value. In a nutshell, fall from height accidents is an expense which is morbid, mortal, and financial. I've obviously quoted my source there. So can we, as an industry, say that budgets or financial limits are still a viable excuse? Because we do have a lagging indicator there. We've got information, we've got data, and the data is saying that it is costing us more to be a reactive after an incident has occurred than it would be by, I use this term loosely, but biting the bullet from a financial perspective and rather investing in preventing the accidents from happening than having to face the costs afterwards. All right. Then from a time management perspective, again, I reiterate this and probably can't say it enough times. I understand as a safety professional that we don't just run one construction site. And even if you are just responsible for a static environment, it is constantly changing. As professionals, we tend to get onto site sometimes even 5 o'clock in the mornings. That excludes the time you leave your house. 5:30, you've got a set agenda for the day. And your first audit is scheduled for 8 o'clock, and next thing, someone didn't plan correctly and you need to go out onto site and do an incident report, or there's been a near miss. And by the time you look, you haven't had lunch, it's 1 o'clock, you haven't done your reports. It might be month end, you might have to do your man hours, your LTI stats, your health and safety committee meeting minutes. So I appreciate that our environment is extremely taxing, it's extremely time consuming, and it demands our attention all day, every day. So what I would encourage you to do as a practitioner is let's learn some leadership skills, some management skills. You can't just look at our profession in isolation. So as practitioners, learn to delegate, learn to time manage, and most importantly, learn to say no. People are going to keep continuing to push your boundaries until you get to a point where they start respecting it. SheReps should be taken, do some skills development or skills transfer with your SheReps on site. Take them on your site walks. Start teaching them how to look at, and I use the term low risk activity loosely, because to me a risk is a risk in construction, despite low, medium, and high. And then learn to prioritize your site inspections, which I'll get into a little bit further detail shortly. All right, so as I've mentioned in my previous slide, lack of knowledge on services and products available and legal standards available, to me, from the incident investigations that I have done, has been one of the #1 leading contributors, is that we don't know. So how can you fix, or how can you implement if you didn't know that, for example, the safety harness with D-link or the shock absorber lanyard is out there? So what I'm suggesting to us as an industry, if you look at your principal contractors, if you've got a small organization, incorporate that into your industry or your company, is as part of your KPAs and KPIs, ensure that you have dedicated at least 2 hours a week to researching and meeting with suppliers. I mean, you've got the likes of Protector, for example. I know that Annelie, and I'm only mentioning her by name now because we've been together in industry for quite some time, she's always a phone call away. So get to know your various associations and your statutory bodies that you're working with. Get to know the people, call on them for advice and get their opinions or experience on it. Okay, 2 hours a week, that's all it is. Get to know your products, start doing price comparisons. There's such a huge range of safety harnesses that are locally produced, that are SANS approved, that are available, that is comfortable. But yet a lot of our safety practitioners do not know that those products are out on the market simply because we do not take the time to get to know who our suppliers are. Okay, and then as we've mentioned, we do have budget and time, and financial constraints. So meet up with your suppliers. I've given Dylan, for example, from Protector, a few phone calls before and said, listen, this is the budget that I've got to work with. This is our full risk that we have. What can we purchase or put into place that meets this requirement? So, and again, I'm not saying this out of bias or preference. It's just simply because they've obviously been in the presentation today. Okay, and then don't limit your products just to safety harnesses and lifelines. And then most importantly, I do understand that SANS codes or SABS codes needs to be purchased, and it is quite costly. It's one of the frustrations I personally face in the industry. But when you do your yearly budgets, make sure that you allocate a certain percentile to the purchasing of these SANS codes. And then most importantly, familiarize yourselves with the contents of these codes. Okay, and then last but not least, we always discuss planning before we, on construction phase, and it's no knock at anyone, but again, we're in construction, and if you're on the ground, we understand that most times as safety practitioners, we don't get involved from the planning phase or from the design phase. We should, but we don't. So people like your quantity surveyors, for example, they are the personnel that are procuring your labor onlys, your painters, your bricklayers, which we've seen are most of the, high risk. They're working on your scaffolds, they're working on your ladders, your mobile elevated work platforms, etc. Your quantity surveyors are responsible for actually procuring and approving your suppliers. So get your quantity surveyors trained, make them aware of the hazards and risks and financial costs implicated in not having compliant contractors selected. And I don't know for most of you if you don't know, but if you do want to get your own presentations, compiled from the data that you've gathered, presented to your professional team, keep a record of that, get your HR manager to sign it off, and you can actually submit that and get that approved as part of your CPD hour allocations at SACP-CMP. All right, please just excuse this graph. It is somewhat outdated, once again, due to lack of available data. But looking at the incidents, the construction industry has the third highest number of fatalities per 100,000 workers. All right, and I've quoted my source there. Look, there is no surprise that construction attributes to such a high fatality rate because we are a very high risk profession. All right, if I break that stat down even further, so you've got construction and we contributing to 1/3 of the highest fatalities in industry. If you break that stat down just a little bit further, we have a look at 4 high-risk categories. That will be your working at heights or fall from heights, your motor vehicle accidents, electrocution. Those categories make up for your, sorry, I knew I should have kept my cat out of my office. Sorry about that, guys.
Dr. Gordon, sorry
yes.
to interrupt you. I just wanted to alert you of the time. I know.
All right, I'm literally 2 seconds from away.
Thank you.
All right, so we have a look in the industry. We break that up into sections, and then we've got fall through roofs, which attest to the highest amounts of fall through or fall from roofs. Okay, so challenges during investigations. All right, the paperwork is cumbersome. I speak from a near miss. We ridicule people. We don't get to the root cause. We always classify it into 2 categories. It's either unsafe acts or behaviors or unsafe working conditions. But we're not getting to the root cause, and we cannot read incidents in isolation. If I look at our section 24s, which is the crux of what I'm getting to here now, is our section 24 investigations where it's been a loss of a limb or a fatality. As safety officers, we have a look at, or incident investigators, we look at everything from a risk perspective. But the minute you get your OSH attorneys involved, they approach it from an Occupational Health and Safety Act and compliance perspective. So this is where I was going with the SANS codes, getting to know your standards and codes, and then incorporate or amalgamate both of those. I was going to briefly touch on neurochemicals, but I'm not going to go into that due to our time constraints. So my suggestions and solutions going forward, that we get to know our SANS codes, that we incorporate those SANS codes into our audit criteria, and we focus on the 5 key contributing industries or sectors within our industry, which is obviously confined space, working at heights, electrical works, and excavations and mobile plants. And then as auditors, we need to ensure that we become well-versed with our codes of practice, make freely, and IWH as well. If you go and have a look on their website, they do have a lot of references to specific codes within the various chambers. And then just a suggestion, I'm going to use IWH again as they did the presentation today, that we do have our governing bodies or our voluntary bodies that could make available a platform for us as industry representatives to go and register our incidents on, but in an anonymous manner. So you've got 10 or 11 drop-down sheets. We as principal contractors could mandate or say we don't close out an incident report until you've got like a little code that gets printed out to say we have registered the incident, because this is the only way we're going to start capturing data. As I've mentioned in the beginning of my presentation, we don't have sufficient isolated data. It is so broad that we don't have enough information to pinpoint us, in terms of a leading indicator where to go. And then my really most favorite and contributing factor that I've seen is boots on the ground. Boots on the ground, guys. Walk your sites at least twice a day. That is the best way for us to prevent and to foresee and put into place control measures before an incident occurs. Safety is not just a job, it's a vocation. We are working with people, not with paper. And do more than you get paid to do. It opens doors of opportunity and avenues you never dreamt possible. Sorry for going over time, guys.
Thank you so much, Dr. Bronin-Grens. Thank you so much for such an informative session as well. All the comments and questions that the people have posed will be forwarded to you. If you've got the time, if you can please also go through the chat and see if you can address any of those key questions there. I'll swiftly move along to our last agenda item. I want to sincerely apologize for the fact that we are running over. But next up, we've got Mduduzi Mthethwa, who's worked at Transnet in the Occupational Health Clinic and later joined FEM as the KZN Claims Manager. He was a registered nurse with training through DUT. He completed an MDP at UKZN, Business Administration in GIBS, and CODA course at UNISA. I'll hand over through to you, and thank you so much for availing yourself and taking over the session. Thank you.
Thank you, Doma, and good day to everyone. I'll try to be as quick as possible. Please tell me if you can see my presentation.
We can go ahead.
Okay, thank you. So yeah, my take today is just to highlight and share on the submission of COVID claims acquired at work. So my first point will be to discuss on what do we mean when we talk about occupational acquired COVID-19. I won't get into details on the explanation, but it's just a disease that is contracted at work as is stipulated on Code Act, arising out and in the course of employment. So I've highlighted on that because it's coming from the circular of CF of 2003-2020. So it does highlight even on the COID Act that this is also in line with a single infection or exposure or multiple exposure. And all the claims that are acquired should be clearly be set out on as contemplated on section 65. So I'm sharing here on the submission of claims what is required. So whenever there is a COVID case reported, an employer has a responsibility to complete a declaration form, which I will share at the bottom, and then also complete a FEM COVID exposure forms, which will also follow after that, and attach the certified ID copy and a COVID positive result. how to access those forms. We can use the FEM forms online that can be able to access those forms, or you can request from anyone in FEM can be able to assist. If then that is completed, it can be registered via FEM registry. As you can see, the email address that can be used, or it can be registered online. Okay.
Can you make your presentation full screen? There was a request.
Sorry, are you able to see
on the
it
bottom right
screen?
there, the little presentation? Yeah, that guy. Press him again.
Sorry, pardon me with that. Is it changing case?
Yeah, it still hasn't gone full screen. Okay, just continue then.
Okay. Yeah, sorry. No, it's not moving. I'm sorry about that. Yeah, on the forms, as I indicated, that the declaration of the declaration form needs to be completed. It's the same as an employer's report, but this one are for occupational acquired diseases. So this needs to be completed. There's page 1 and page 2. All of that needs to be completed. And the next one will be the exposure form, where it also inquired the list of those employees that were exposed. There are a couple of questions that are asked on how then the employee was exposed. So we appreciate if that can also be completed. And the next one will be then a risk assessment, which is very, very relevant and pertinent when it comes to knowing and understanding now how and when to report these cases and what assessment needs to be done at work. Thank you. I think that's it. Can you hear Noma?
Yes, I can. Thank you so much, Ndu. I just want to inform everyone that, again, the slides or the presentation will be available from the website. So we are aware of the fact that it could not go on presentation mode, but then you will be able to access this presentation and you'll be able to see those forms clearly. Thank you so much, Ndu. If you can switch off your video and mute yourself so that we can close the session. Once again, thank you to all our speakers. Thank you for the insightful session. To everyone that has attended the session and has allowed us to steal a few minutes from your day. We do apologize for the fact that we went over, but I'm sure you agree that all the sessions were important and very informative. All the recordings and slides will be up on our website. Thank you so much once again. And this is a way of closing today's session. Thank you and enjoy the rest of your Wednesday.